We've hardly had time to settle down from the last solar storm when a new coronal hole rotates into the Earth's strike zone, and the sun, it's no longer spotless. What do these things mean for you? Those stories and more in the news this week. This forecast sponsored in part by Eric Johansson. Check him out at instagram.com/scubist. Space weather this week continues to calm down a bit from that big solar storm that we had last week that brought Aurora down to the mid-latitudes, but just barely. As we switch to our front side sun, you can see that big coronal hole rotating off of the sun's west limb. That's the coronal hole that brought us the fast wind that gave us the solar storm. But guess what? We have yet another coronal hole in the middle of the disk right now. That one in the southern hemisphere is going to be rotating into the Earth's strike zone here in the next couple days, and it could get us up to about active conditions, but I doubt it's going to bump us to solar storm levels. Now also, if we look at the very far the east limb, you can also see a bright region rotating into Earth view. This region has been giving a little bit of pop, pop, pop with the little tiny solar flares here and there, but nothing too substantial. As we switch to our backside sun, you can actually see that it's actually been part of a whole cluster of active regions. As a matter of fact, we had two active regions that ended up fizzling out before they rotated into Earth view, and then a whole cluster of other ones came into view, but this one has managed to stay robust. It's now gotten a new designation, so we have a sunspot on the Earth-facing sun, and it's no longer a spotless sun. It has boosted the solar flux just a little bit, but not enough to get us into marginal radio propagation just yet, but we are watching it. Switching to our moon, we are now passing through the first quarter phase, and by the 6th, the moon will be about 50% illuminated. So you night sky watchers, if you're looking for those dim objects in the sky, you're going to need to check your local rise and set times. And now for your NEOGeo orbit outlook. You can imagine with this big solar storm that we're coming down from, it's kind of left the near-Earth environment a bit rattled. As we switch to our low-energy particle environment, these are the particles that can cause surface charging on the surface of the spacecraft, including the solar arrays, that then can discharge and cause shorts and all sorts of electrical disturbances. You can see around the 28th and 29th, the fluxes in and around the geo orbits really start building up, and they kind of swirl around and last for a few days before things begin to really quiet down and they get flushed. So the satellite operators, the surface charging is an issue for you, especially around the geo orbits. Now, as we switch to our higher energy particles, these are the particles that can cause internal charging because the particles penetrate deeper into the spacecraft electronics and can cause some bigger disruptions for how the satellite performs. You can see around the 29th, we started getting injections of flux in these higher energies, and yes, that does cause internal charging. That was around the 29th, but it does get flushed periodically, and it's all pretty much in and around geo, even outside of the geo orbits. So the inner orbits seem to be doing pretty well, but if you are in geo orbits, you could be getting both surface charging and internal charging easily over the next few days. Switching to our solar storm conditions, we are anticipating the fast wind from that southern coronal hole that's rotating into the Earth strike zone. At high latitudes, NOAA is expecting active conditions with up to about a 30% chance of minor storm conditions. At mid-latitudes, we're only expecting unsettled conditions with maybe about a 30% chance of active conditions, and these possibilities will continue for the next couple days, but I tell you, as soon as the disturbance ramps up, it's probably going to ramp back down. So you aurora photographers at high latitude, you're going to get a pretty decent chance, but at mid-latitudes, wow, it's going to be fleeting, so only if you're dedicated should you even begin to chase this one. Meanwhile, after that, as we move into through the weekend, things should definitely settle down quite a bit. Switching to your solar flare and particle radiation storm outlook over the coming week, we are still in the green when it comes to big solar flares. We don't have any risk for radio blackouts, so this should make you GPS users on Earth's dayside very happy. Your reception should be pretty good, all things considered. Now, we do have region 2749 on the Earth-facing disk, and it is giving us a few pops here and there in terms of solar flares, but they're really low. I mean, hardly A, not even B-class solar flares. So you amateur radio radio operators and emergency responders, you might get a little extra noise on the bands, but not really all that much to worry about. The solar flux is still sitting in the high 60s, and so it's still poor radio propagation on Earth's dayside, and unfortunately this is going to continue easily over the next week and possibly 2 weeks. Now also, because we are at solar minimum, the solar ray flux is a bit more intense than it normally would be, so you frequent flyers, and this does include aircrew who fly over 800 hours annually and fly at high latitudes and high altitudes, you are in the moderate range for radiation dose, and this does include prenatal passengers, so please take this in consideration in your flight plans. So even though we're coming down from a big solar storm that we had just last week, we've got yet another disturbance as a new coronal hole rotates in through the Earth strike zone. So aurora photographers, especially if you're at high latitudes, you could get more aurora. Now mid-latitudes, well, it may be pretty much over before it even starts, so only if you're really dedicated should you go out and try to chase. But after that, as we move in through the weekend, things should definitely be calming down for quite a while. Now amateur radio operators, well, we do have a new region on the Earth-facing disk, but it's not really boosting the solar flux all that much. We're still dealing with poor radio propagation on Earth's dayside, but you might get a little bit more noise on the bands here and there as this little thing goes pop, 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 pop. Now, GPS users, well, you know, things look pretty good for you. The storm that's coming really isn't going to be that much of a disturbance. The bright region on the Earth-facing disk really isn't that big a deal. So, you know, as long as you stay away from the dawn dust terminators and away from aurora, your GPS reception should look pretty top-notch. I'm Tamitha Scove. Thank you for watching.